let's go ahead and get started. Well, let's see. We have such a fun evening ahead of us. So tonight, welcome to week 9, of Hug It Out. This is our online place to deeply connect and restore during COVID-19. I am here every evening. That's so not true. I am here every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Bringing together different healers and therapists who are gifting their time to us for deep healing connection during COVID-19. Tonight, we are in for a great treat with a dear friend, a dear old friend. We go back to middle school or junior high. His name is Brad Galvin, and he grew up to be a trauma specialist. He spent the last 15 years working with Washington state tribes. He specializes in addiction and trauma. He's trained in gambling, counseling, substance abuse of any kind. He's also a deeply committed father and stinking good person. So, Brad, welcome to Hug It Out. It's so good to have you back here.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be back. Yeah, it's been really neat during this time. Just, you guys might not know, but Jenny and I have been able to connect after all these years and find that we are on such similar paths. And so we have a couple projects we're working on together now. It's just so cool. It's so interesting how personality really doesn't change. Think of 13-year-old Jendi and realize that she's like so similar in all the good ways. So it's been a real treat. Not to embarrass you, but you're pretty cool. So.
Oh, thanks. You're pretty cool too. It has been fun to reconnect. And, the more we talk about our specialties, Brad comes from a super science background of EMDR, which is kind of like the kapow of trauma healing, using a lot of like, oh my gosh, I don't speak this language, but like bilateral stimulation, which activates both sides of the brain to move trauma through the body. I don't think about it that way. I'm super woo. So I'm like, yeah, the energy like comes back into the body and, we call in our spiritual ancestors. So it's been fun to talk about how very parallel ways that we are with people healing from a science perspective. And then I'm more on the Hakomi side, the IFS side. So it's been a fun way to blend our modalities together. And the other day he was talking about this technique called the flash technique. And I was like, God, that's corny. Like what? Who calls anything the flash technique? You know what I mean? And he's like, no, this is so cool. It's a really neat way to lower the activation of what trauma or stress does to the body. So Brad, would you be willing to share a little bit more about this flash technique, why you're here and why that you even wanted to do that? Because it sounds like a superpower kind of thing.
Yeah, well, what I think I'll do is maybe just give a little bit of an overview. And I know when I came on week 2, I talked a little bit more about EMDR, and we don't really need to go way down that rabbit hole, but just to give people a little bit of an overview. And then, I just want to jump into it and have an opportunity to kind of walk through this practice. You'll notice I'm sitting a little further from my screen this time around, and there's a reason for that, because I'm going to be demonstrating and actually walking through the process with you guys, and it involves some use of our physical bodies. So for me, when I think about EMDR generally, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so really what that has to do with is at its core, taking a traumatic memory, using bilateral stimulation such as eye movements as a way to process through something that otherwise would get kind of stuck. It's sort of like, for those of us human beings, most of us who've experienced a trauma, it's kind of like Groundhog's Day. We're a day further along in life, but it still feels like that traumatic thing just happened. And that's because it doesn't get processed the same way that typical memories do, where we sleep, we have REM sleep, and we kind of work through it. And then we, more or less feel refreshed the next day. And maybe the thing we went to bed thinking about is not what we wake up thinking about. And so our body has kind of done that natural healing. Well, what Francine Shapiro found in around late 80s is that for traumatic memories, if you can go in and manually do what the body does for non-traumatic memories automatically in REM sleep, then you can see some of the same healing without, and this is really important, without having to get all into the pain of the memory. You know, you still, in typical EMDR, which we won't be doing tonight, but in typical EMDR, you are connecting with the memory just enough to light up the neural network so that you can get the physical part of the brain and body online to do the processing. But really no more than that. And honestly, even when I'm doing EMDR with people, I don't need to know the details of the trauma. And that often is a relief for people, because the most common symptom with trauma is avoidance. Like, who wants to go back there? I've spent all these years with all these coping strategies to not have to feel that. Now I go to you and you tell me you have to feel that. You know, who wants to do that? So EMDR is a gentle way to process. And so what's been cool about how EMDR was created is when Francine Shapiro came up with the method, she said, look, I discovered this method, it's cool, and take it and learn and grow this in whatever way. So we have a lot of different things that we can do with EMDR related techniques. So things that aren't technically EMDR, but are based in the idea that we can use bilateral stimulation, right-left stimulation, like eye movements, to heal. And so it's been so cool. So the week 2, we did the Peaceful Place, which is a resource where you use bilateral stimulation. And it's one of those things that someone created based on Francine Shapiro saying, go ahead and, you know, make this yours. So the flash technique is actually something that was created just a few years ago, or you could say discovered. I don't know what you want to call it, but it was a guy by the, this is kind of a nice segue just into this, and we'll just roll from here if that's all right. So, so this guy named Phil Manfield, he discovered this technique, and it's a way that you can quickly reduce the emotional intensity of traumatic memories. And so it's based in EMDR, but it's not EMDR. So as I mentioned, I'm an EMDR therapist, and my knowledge of EMDR certainly informs my work with the flash technique. It's maybe a little bit easier for me to explain because it's kind of the water that I swim in. But they really are two separate things. So as I shared last time we met, I'm not providing psychotherapy tonight. This doesn't create a therapist-client relationship. However, I'd be happy to refer you to a therapist after our session if you would like. Also, if you're uncertain whether you can think of a disturbing memory and then set it aside without getting overwhelmed, I suggest that you don't participate in tonight's session. So there's just kind of that safety above all else. There is some risk that you could become upset. That said, the magic of the flash technique is that it doesn't require re-experiencing of the trauma in order to lessen trauma's impact. And it's intended to give you a taste of the benefits of EMDR therapy without delving into the traumatic memory. And the way I have this set up is we'll talk about the technique more after we do the technique. Okay, so yeah, because you don't have to delve into the memory and it can be highly effective, it's one of my favorite tools. So yeah, so let's get started. So I'd like for you to choose a traumatic memory and not feel it or go into it in any detail. I don't even need to know what it is, and we won't be talking about it. Just choose something you've experienced that's a trauma and it meets these criteria. So first, it happened after the age of 3, but it didn't just happen. So it wasn't something that happened to you yesterday, for example. So not super early, like pre-verbal, or very recent. The other is you can clearly remember it. Also, it happened only one time, so it's not a recurring memory. And the last thing is it doesn't have a feeder memory. And a feeder memory is a previous memory that's at least as strong as the current memory, with the same theme, same body sensations, and same negative thoughts attached to it. So for example, failing out of school in the 10th grade would be a feeder memory for being fired from a job last year because it happened before the current memory. It has the same theme of failure. the same body sensation of a sinking feeling in the chest, and the same negative thought of I'll never be good enough. So bottom line, if you're unsure whether the memory that you've chosen has a feeder memory, you'll want to just choose a different memory, and that's not a big deal. So just to throw some examples out there, it could be a car accident, assault or violence, a failure of some kind, a rejection, as long as there isn't a feeder memory for it. So often with rejection, we've experienced there's some connection to an earlier rejection, but if there isn't, you could choose that. You could choose a nightmare, an incident involving intense shame, an abortion, move from home, homesickness, job loss. So really any of those things or something else that comes to mind, I'd like for you to rate the level of disturbance that the memory would cause you if you let yourself feel it. So we're not trying to feel anything right now, just thinking about how upset you would feel if you let yourself feel it. So 0 to 10 scale, with 10 being the most possible disturbance that you could have. And it should be, what you choose should be at a 6 or greater. So just take a moment, go ahead and come up with a number for that now. Okay, so now identify what we call a positive engaging focus. So this is a thought or memory that brings you joy. And this is really what we're going to be focusing on. So it could be a person, a place, a feeling state, like that moment when you walked into your house on your birthday and everyone yelled, "Surprise!" It could be soothing music or a comfortable chair. The key is that it's positive and fully engaging. So something that really makes you light up, really makes you glow. For me, I think about playing Foursquare with my son. You know, there's something about that memory. There's just a sweetness to it. So some examples could be a childhood cabin, a favorite song, your goddaughter, a funny movie, graduation. I saw a demo on this where someone had chosen making pumpkin pie. For them, that was their positive engaging focus. Could be your dog, an ocean beach near your home, a euphoric feeling state. So just remembering the feeling that you had at a certain time that just feels so good. A time that you laughed until you cried with your best friend. Or it could be the awareness that you are love. So just connecting to whatever that positive focus is. So just take a moment or two now and identify a positive engaging focus. And so, okay, so I'm gonna pat my legs, and go ahead and pat your legs along with me. So I'm exaggerating the movement. You can keep your hands on your lap if you want, but just pat, and we're just gonna go back and forth. So right, left, and just keep doing this. Just tapping on one leg, then the other, about like I'm doing. And now call to mind your positive engaging focus and all the things that come with it as you continue to pat your legs. And we're just going to keep doing that. And now when I say flash, I'd like you to blink 3 times quickly. So flash, blink, blink, blink. Good. And if your eyes are closed, it's okay. However, you're going to want to open your eyes, and when you do the flash, blink, 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 okay? So let's stay with that positive engaging focus and deepen it and really feel it. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Good. So what do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste, touch, and hear as you think of your positive engaging focus? Flash, blink, blink, blink. Just really getting into that. What do you notice? What comes up for you? Flash, blink, blink, blink. As you think about what makes this such a special place, person, activity, or memory, allow it to fill you. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Okay. So now we're gonna pause for a moment and we're just gonna check in briefly with the original trauma memory you came up with and just ask yourself what's different about it now. Okay, now back to your positive, engaging focus and back to padding on your lap. So just really letting yourself sink into that. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Good. So focusing all your attention and energy on this special place, person, thing, or activity. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Noticing and paying particular attention to the emotions that come up as you connect with this. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Maybe you're noticing joy, excitement, peacefulness. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Are there certain pleasant thoughts or images that go with this positive, engaging focus? Go ahead and notice those. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Really letting that sink in. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Okay, so pausing for a moment now, thinking about the original memory, notice what's different about it now. And we're gonna do one more round. So let's get back to our padding here. So returning to your positive, engaging focus, just letting your mind drift on the blissfulness of thoughts of it. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Staying with that. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Good. Just feeling that positive focus throughout your whole body and mind. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Great. Just staying with that, feeling all the goodness of this positive, engaging focus. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Okay, great. So we're gonna pause and notice as you think about the original memory, what number would you give that now, 0 to 10, with 10 being the most disturbing and 0 being not disturbing at all? So just think that to yourself or write it down. And that is the flash technique. So, of course, because this is definitely the strangest way that I've ever done this, I'm so curious to know what that was like for people. Anyone who wants to pop in and share? Again, not necessarily, I don't want you to share about what the trauma memory was that you chose. Only any changes that you noticed in it, any shift in your, what we call your SUDS scale, subjective units of distress scale. So that's 0 to 10, was there any change there? Yeah.
I noticed that.
Happy to share. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
I was going to say I noticed just my state of relaxation, and I just felt like a lot of positive energy around that memory. So yeah, it's interesting. I think the halfway through you asked what my scale was, and it was like it had started at a 6 and it was coming down to a 4. But at the end of it, it almost came back up again, and I'm curious about why that happened again. Like it sort of like during the process, it was like, you know, hitting a 4, but then when we were all done, it sort of like kind of I sort of bounced up again. I'm not sure if that makes sense how I describe that, but
that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't have a sort of a simple explanation, but I want to keep that in mind because I think it might link into some other comments we might hear. So yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I have a bunch of thoughts about it, but I'm going to try to restrain myself for now. But thank you for sharing that. And Kimberly?
Can you guys hear me? Okay, so I'm curious too. I was at an 8 and then dropped into a real peaceful sensation. And then the next round, I actually felt anger, really contained on the right side of my body. And then the next was joy. And then I ended at a 4. But I really felt it bubble up, really crisp, clear anger before it unraveled again, was my interpretation.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Right. So Todd had come down a little and then went back up, and you had kind of some peacefulness and then some anger came up, and then it sort of seemed like it was more calm after that.
Mm-hmm. Moving through.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to write a couple of these things down. Great. Other experiences?
Hi. So
Hello.
I guess I would need more time to practice it because I was, I guess, concentrating on what I was supposed to be doing, and it took my concentration off of really feeling what I was supposed to feel. And so maybe if I do it again, I would know more. I would just be able to concentrate better.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. What did you notice as far as your number over the course
So
of the...
my number started at a 6 and it stayed at a 6. And I think that's why I was just unable to hold my concentration enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, the most common, and this kind of I think relates to what you had said, Todd and Kimberly as well, is that it's interesting because there was a way more setup on the trauma memory than I would normally do. And so normally if I were with a client, it would be like, there's a trauma memory and we kind of go with it because I know that I can, regardless of what it is, I can take it and do EMDR with it, depending if we kind of get stuck or what happens. But the most common way, because the flash technique is actually a neurobiological phenomenon. So if it doesn't have the effect that maybe you expect, it's because there's something about it that was maybe missing. So when you said being a little bit distracted, I think that is a major one. So not having like a strong enough felt sense of the positive engaging focus. That could definitely be it. Certainly as you're going along, to respond to Kimberly, you normally wouldn't feel any anger or any sort of upset feeling. If we were working one-on-one, I would have you tweak your positive engaging focus probably. Because there's some of the trauma memory that's seeping in. Depending on what the memory is, there can also be some way that we might have a blocking belief, it's called. So a blocking belief could be, if I'm not upset about this, then for example, I won't later be able to protect myself from it happening again. That can be a common blocking belief. So there's a number of little issues that can kind of explain that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also do want to highlight that over, the course of we did that over about 5 or 6 minutes. And so that Todd had noticed a shift and then it went back up a little bit, but he had noticed that shift. And then Kimberly, that yours, even though we would say there was a little bit of quote unquote contamination, probably a little bit of the memory creeping in, that you still went from an 8 to a 4. So that's definitely a positive thing as well. Yeah. So, but that concentration piece, that's really it. I think about they were saying about when it's not as effective, about 95% of the time, it's related to the positive engaging focus not being fully developed, and or kind of a creep in a little bit of the trauma memory, because you really just want enough to where it just like flashes in your mind. And yeah, so that may be a little bit on me too, on my setup, to maybe provide less of a description of how to choose the trauma memory. So yeah, but I really appreciate the feedback and the sharing. Other experiences that people would like to share?
Yeah, I started at an 8, and I went to my relaxing memory, and it was very, very calming and soothing. And there's definitely some waves of memories coming through that were kind of big. Not overwhelming, but I was still calm with that peaceful place, and it dropped to a 6, and I was able to stay in that with that lower number.
Okay, so for you, Tasha, it went from an 8 to a 6, but there was a little bit of the memory creeping in there.
Exactly, and not in a bad way, but I definitely was, it came back a little, but I think the calming memory was really soothing, so that balanced it out.
Right. No, this is really helpful feedback for me, because I'm definitely noticing that the trauma memory was in consciousness for too long, and that's really good feedback, because I think that for this many people to have that, I think it was probably there too long, maybe at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, that's good. You had a little bit of a decrease, so that's still definitely positive. So, but this is great. This is good for me to hear. And of course, my primary goal is always to do no harm. And so I'm glad that at least so far it hasn't gotten worse. That does happen sometimes, very rarely, where the number can go up a little bit. So I'm glad we haven't had that so far, but I'm glad people are sharing. This is helpful for me. Yeah.
I really enjoyed this exercise, especially after you showed up on the second episode of doing the peaceful place. Like, I had a different experience with choosing a positive experience, which was wonderful. Like, ooh, I have more than one positive experience that I can like rock in, or whatever you want to call that. And I was having so much enjoyment, like fully feeling myself in that positive place, that I was really loving that. And I was actually delighting in watching Todd's face as he was going into the really beautiful memories. He was just like all lit up, and his mouth was like up and smiling, and just like this round face of happiness and delight. So like, wow. And I actually didn't know if my eyes should have been open or closed during the majority of it. I tried it both ways. They both worked. So anyway, so I was really delighting in watching Todd, which made it a double awesome experience for me. And then when I went into the traumatic memory, so I chose one that was at an 8, I went to a 4, and in the background of myself, I watch like what's going on. I have like a little bird on a branch, kind of watching everything that's going on. And I remember being just really surprised at how little time we spent in the remembering piece, and then going immediately back. And I think I'm kind of waxing on for a little bit, but I was like kind of frustrated not being able to stay back into that place and like dwell a little bit and like feel more of it. But the rhythm part like kept me moving. which I appreciated, that rhythm and the like staying with the train. That's kind of what it felt like, here we go, we're going back to the good place. You can't say no to that.
Right.
So overall, it was a good experience for me. I am curious to see how it lasts. I'm very curious to see how that is.
Definitely. Well, that's great. Yeah, that's really good that you kind of had that. And, you know, with, so there was actually a study that was done in 2017, and they had looked, that was exposure to spiders for people who are arachnophobic. And
oh my God,
what they found was, and what they found was if they exposed people long enough for them to actually be able to register that it's a spider, it kicked in this fear part of their brain, and they had more difficulty later when they were exposed to spiders. Whereas if they flashed it just long enough for it to register subliminally for the person, then they found that the fear response actually went down, and they were more able to approach spiders and things like that. And so for this exercise, it's really intended to be based on the like trauma comes into your mind, and then you spend all your time on the positive engaging focus. Quickly check into it, all back into the positive engaging focus. And so so that's helpful for me. I mean, it's helpful that I'm glad that, you know, people have kind of moved generally in the direction of the number coming down, and certainly even coming down a couple points over the course of 5 minutes is great. It's just, I know how well this can work, and you know, it can go from an 8 to a 2 or even to a 0 in 5 or 7 minutes. So, and you know, it's still very positive that there's been some positive movement there. So what it tells me is deepening the positive engaging focus, and then potentially spending slightly, sorry that you guys are my guinea pigs, but you're really helping me a lot. I thank you for that. But possibly spending less time describing the traumatic memory. And I'm open to feedback about it too, if you guys have thoughts about that.
Yeah, Brad, I want to add though that I'm tracking you, and I'm hearing your, you know, desire to have a greater shift or a greater decrease in the number. But
sure.
I really benefited in getting the specific emotion. When I'm at an 8, I'm getting flooded. And sometimes I can't sift through what the primary emotion or feeling is. And I got very clear about what it is that I'm experiencing around this memory. And that to me is tremendously helpful, because then I can interpret more about, I can make more meaning around how do I work with or protect or move forward from knowing that what came up for me is anger. It's not X, Y, and Z, it's boom. And then I had an opportunity to work with it and be like, and it's okay.
Wow.
So I think it was very beneficial.
Interesting.
Okay.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, it's neat that actually, it seemed like that was maybe the thing that you needed to come from it, was to get that clarity and then to sort of have that shift. I mean, this is happening, this physical part is happening in a part of our brains that we can't access any other way. So it's always interesting for me. That's why I'm really listening in an open mind, open heart to your experience, because I'm learning too, and I never know exactly what's going to come up for someone or how they're going to process it. Or obviously I had sort of interpreted anger to be like, oh, there must have been this, you know, I'm used to thinking in a certain way. Oh, there was contamination of the trauma memory. How do we fix that? And you're like, no, that was good. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good then. Because you know, right? I don't know. I'm just trying to analyze it, but I'm way over here and you're in the experience.
And naming it as anger is like, nope, yep, I have every reason to be angry. And now I feel a sense of empowered to move forward with, that wasn't okay. That's not going to happen again. It's very clear that I was experiencing anger. And anger is I use it as you know, beneficial. And there was a major boundary cross. So it's like, this is good. This is so clear. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad.
I don't know if this relates or not, but I had an interesting experience because about halfway through, when mine really decreased to a 2 or so, the memory took on a feeling of like, it was a very serious, you know, obviously it's a traumatic experience, but it took on a very light flavor about halfway through that I could almost, it was almost like, there was a feeling in my body that was like, it's silly to still be upset about this because it's really fine. Which I thought was interesting. It was like, okay.
Is that a feeling you've had about this event before?
Nope. And I won't share the whole event, but I will tell you it was a practical joke when I was a kid that was kind of done to me that went the wrong way. So maybe because there's that flavor in there, Kimberly was talking about anger being part of the emotion. Maybe being able to process it that way, my system was suddenly going, yeah, you know, they were just messing around and it went wrong. It's really fine, which I've never felt before. So that was really interesting.
Wow. What's so cool about what you said is, what often happens with like doing the EMDR processing itself is that people talk about an experience, and I've done it as a client myself, where it's sort of like an objective compassion towards the experience. Like, oh, I see it. I'm not maybe in it anymore, but I see it, and I have this different, not just mental understanding, but like knowing about the situation.
That is a beautiful example of compassionate witnessing, Todd and Kimberly, of seeing but not being in that experience, and having from our blissful, wise self, whatever you want to call that place, of deeply understanding what happened from like this space. Hallelujah to the space. Compassionate witnessing. So I feel like that exercise really opens up the system to, like, for Kimberly, really clarifies the experience, you know, takes away the static of like, boom, anger, yes, power. And Todd's experience of, wow, really opening up that place of seeing it from a different perspective.
It's fascinating. So cool. I like that idea of, yeah, compassionate witnessing. I like the way you put that. Yeah. Because it's not detached or disconnected. It's still connected. It's just with a greater kind of awareness, sort of like a meditative perspective or something.
Yeah, it's self, our who we are, seeing what happened to us, which is one of the cusp of the place we need to witness trauma from, is this place of compassionate witnessing, versus being in, you know, that old place again, where we're dwelling and ruminating and going back to it, or again being 3, you know, in some abusive situation. But seeing it from that place, which is what EMDR therapy does, from what I understand, is this really beautiful place of seeing it from our wise self place. Yeah. Powerful stuff, Brad. And a question comes to mind. How the hell did someone come up with that?
It's a great question.
Seriously. Flash, blink, blink, blink. Like, what?
Yeah.
I'm curious what, you know, if it was like brain scans that they figured this out in, or.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely clear how it came about. I think it was, yeah, something related to that awareness that something could be in awareness just very briefly. When they first did the flash technique, people would spend more time focused on the trauma, but they found that less time focused on the trauma, the minimum amount necessary is actually the best. And so even if you just call it to mind, yep, I'm aware of it. Yeah, that's an 8. And then lean into the positive engaging focus, there's some relief. I don't know how it came about, but one thing that they did in our training, one of the trainings was they had us come up with 2 traumatic events at a 6 or higher. And we only focused on one. So say, okay, bring that first event to mind. And then we went through the flash, those sets that we did. And then we went back and they had to say, okay, what number? And it, went from, like people have talked about, some people it went from an 8 to a 6, some had more dramatic change. Some people it barely went down at all, right? So even with the people who created the technique, there's some inconsistency. But what was cool is, so yeah, there was that first event came down, but then they said, and what about for the second event? And I was like, I wrote a little comment, like, this was a webinar. I wrote a little comment. I was like, what do you mean the second event? We only worked on the first. They said, we know, we just want to know what happened with the second event. And I'm like, well, come to think of it, the first went from like an 8 to a 4, and the second went from like a 6 to a 2. What the hell?
Oh, that's so interesting. Wow.
And some, I don't use this exact approach to doing EMDR, but one common approach is to write down your 10 best and 10 worst life experiences. Then what he would do is, of the 10 worst, he might pick the least upsetting of those and do the flash technique on it, and then go back and say, okay, yeah, that went from an 8 to a 4 or whatever, and then go through the other 9 and find that without doing anything but just identifying those earlier in the session, long enough for them to be in working memory, those also went down. So that could be in the first session that you could have that kind of shift with somebody. So I'm rethinking, maybe I might want to do that, at some point in the therapy, just as an experiment to see, oh, wow, they don't even know why exactly it is, but that proves that, I guess I was actually reading something that said, if we bring something to mind, it stays in working memory for about 5 hours. So that would make sense, that if we brought up this trauma, it was just on our list, then we focused on another trauma to do the flash technique on, that other trauma could also experience a reduction. But I mean, this is like, they just came up with this a few years ago. Like, this is brand new stuff. I mean, when I was looking to do this for a group like this, and I actually reached out to the guy, Phil Manfield, and I was grateful that he emailed me back. He said, I don't see why you couldn't do it with a group. But even he is they're actually doing a pilot study with this right now with a group of nurses, a nursing union actually, because obviously there's a lot of trauma there. And they said, hey, this flash technique could be helpful to just bring people's level of distress down fairly quickly. So but when it comes to group stuff, that's even new for them. So you guys are really pioneers here.
I did notice on their website, they were offering free flash techniques for frontline workers. You just fill out just fill out the form, and then you're just like connected in. So Lori, I don't know if that's something, well, anyway, to spread the word of helping others during this time of COVID. Lori works at Harrison Hospital down in Silverdale. So she's deeply committed in this time. And I was thinking about what you were talking about, those 2 memories being linked. And one thing we learned in IFS and Hakomi is that there's no surprise in what comes forward in terms of memories, because everything is linked, like all roads lead to Rome. So when you said that, why does it shift? In the Hakomi model, it's like, we believe in this natural organicity that happens, that whatever is wanting to come up and be healed at that time comes up. And sometimes it's like, God, I'm thinking about lollipops, and over here it's like a tennis shoe, but somewhere there's this connected string that you can't see, from this kind of like logical place whatsoever. But when we're deeply in that experience, it's like, oh, I get the thread between those two experiences. How you prove that in science, I don't know, but we see it all the time.
So cool.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, it takes a lot. I think it takes, look, I want to give everybody just a pat on the back for being willing to try this. It takes a lot of courage to do this, you know, as a client. And I also want to give a shout out to Jendi for the kind of therapy that she does, because this kind of therapy where you're putting yourself out there as a therapist, it takes a lot more courage than, no offense to other approaches, but to having someone come in and complain for an hour and then pay you and leave. You know, like, yeah, you can do that. And I don't necessarily think it's unethical, but it takes a lot more courage to get into it and jump into it with people. But once you've done it and you've had this experience, and just like what we're having now, there's like, it's exciting, right? We're alive, we're in this, and we're co-creating this thing. So it's so cool. And it's so neat, the connections with EMDR and Hakomi, especially in terms of getting in there, you know, getting in there with people, and people having the courage to really do their own work, do their own processing. So I know we have a couple folks who haven't shared yet, and this is not, I'm not pushing you, but just offering, if you'd like, inviting you, if there's anything about your experience that you feel called to share. Hi, Shannon.
Hi. Before I share, I just want to give you an update. I was on the session from week 2, and you did that technique, and that was at the height of just feeling very uneasy about everything. And I found that technique to be very helpful, and I used it over the next couple of days. And then you recommended a book, The Trauma of Everyday Life. And I've been reading that very slowly, just contemplating it. I get up and I read it every morning, and that's been really helpful too. So I just wanted to thank you for both of those, and for giving of your time. For the technique today, I picked something that was around a 6. And I also was surprised at how quickly we were bringing up the trauma and then moving into the positive memory. And I felt like I wasn't connecting enough to the trauma. And when we got to the last part of it, and you asked us to bring up the trauma again, at that point, it felt like you were asking me to bring up a dream. It didn't feel real at all. It felt totally not, and the positive memory felt very vivid and very real to me. So I'd say it went from a 6 to a 2 overall.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing about the impact of the peaceful place. That's really cool, and I'm glad you checked out. I didn't even remember mentioning that book, but yeah, The Trauma of Everyday Life. That's so great. You're doing it and you're using it. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. I think when you talk about it feeling like a dream, people often say that it just feels further away. And I see Todd kind of nodding like it's there, but it's almost might be a little bit like you're seeing it on a movie screen. There's some distance that people often talk about in their response to it. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you experienced some relief, a little reduction in your SUD score there. So thanks for being willing to check in. Appreciate that. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions or anything about maybe the conversation that, I don't know, has got you thinking about something that you'd like to share?
You know, Brad, I want to go back to your episode 2, when I first, when you first introduced the EMDR technique, and what struck me at the time was the importance of rhythm and how we go back to our beginning rhythms. It's really nurturing, and we have multiple rhythms throughout the body, the heartbeat only being one of them. I think there's 7 or there's 8. And so I'm in my head pretty analytical about why did this work and how can I really use it with a client without understanding the entire process. And I'm going with, at a simplistic level, I'm going with rhythm number 1. And rhythm number 2 was the eye flashing. That's confusing to the traumatic brain that is so hyper focused and in sympathetic arousal that it jars it and it can't continue. Like gate control theory, pleasure travels faster than pain, right? So the pleasure blocks a rhythm, blocks the ability for the trauma to travel, right? So what we're going to experience is more pleasure over the trauma. And I'm just reminded of that book the psychiatrist wrote, The Boy Who Was Raised by a Dog. And he has treated a number of different highly traumatized populations. And one of the things that they've used is rocking and massage, where there's rhythmic to rewire. And they have found across multiple cultures that violent offenders were not rocked as babies. So their nervous systems never learned to mimic another's. So they never had that mirror neuron development and learn how to calm their rhythms, the pulses. I mean, can you tell my gears are grinding? So basically what I'm going to do is when a client is flooding, and in Hakomi, we trust the organic process. However, sometimes they drop into the deep end of the pool and it's like, hold on, I feel a responsibility to reel them in. I'm going to add this rhythm. And if one rhythm isn't decreasing their intensity, I'm going to add another rhythm at a baseline level. So thank you for letting me play that, but it's really got my gears grinding.
Yeah, they don't sound like they're grinding to me. I mean, it sounds like everything you're saying is making perfect sense. And maybe that's not what you mean by grinding, but you're like, yeah, you're processing, you're on it. It's so cool. I mean, I think that's the thing. Now that we've done this, you guys, what's so cool about it is you can do this yourself. Like, you're upset about something, you sit there and you tap on your legs like this, and you focus on your positive, engaging focus, and you could say flash to yourself or blink, blink, blink or whatever, and then you blink, blink, blink. And you just keep doing that, and you soothe yourself. You're soothing yourself, and you stay with the positive, engaging focus. Blink, blink, blink. It doesn't take very long. Blink, blink, blink. I'm still there. I'm at the beach. Blink, blink, blink. Okay. And often people will have the experience of, I don't even know, like, what was the thing? You know, I'm not sure. Or it's the same type of thing that happens because it's the same system. It's the same type of thing that happens with EMDR. People come in and you're like, hey, so what about this? And they're like, why are we still talking about this? And I'm like, okay, let's not talk about it. You know, that's why you came in for therapy. That's all you could talk about. And now you're like, yeah, I don't like, that happened a long time ago. Like, why are we even having this conversation? And I'm like, exactly. What would you like to talk about? So it really is soothing. And the thing that's cool about it is it's like an emotional adaptogen, right? Where it's basically, if we're having a positive, like a pleasurable sensation, we add some form of bilateral stimulation to it. The butterfly hug, tapping on our shoulders, walking right, left, lifting and dropping our heels, tapping on our legs, it will deepen. We'll feel even more calm, even more at peace. And if we're upset, we can tap. So one thing, like you said, if a client is sharing something, or even a friend, or we're teaching this to our kids and they're upset, you can say, I want to hear what you have to say. Would you mind just adding this tapping to that? Just as an experiment, it's not going to hurt you. And then I want you to tell me about what's going on, what's wrong, what's happening for you. Because now you're engaging more than just the left brain. You're engaging the entire brain, and you're soothing the whole nervous system, and you're encouraging the person to move towards resolution of this in a natural way that will come to them. So it's such a cool thing, and it's so simple. It's like, when in doubt, tap. You know, like I've had a couple mornings where I've gotten up and I've just, with the COVID or who knows why, but just been kind of grumpy, and I'm like, okay, I lay there in bed where I'm not even up, and I'm just tapping on my legs. I love you. I love you. You know, and just that little thing. And even at the time, I'm like, I don't even know if this is working. But then I get up and I walk around and I'm like, I feel really good. I feel really good today, you know? And I know, had I not taken that time to, yes, the affirmations are awesome, and adding the body, always adding the body to it. And then it goes where it needs to go. And it's like, so cool. It's this thing that all of us have, you know? And so the flash technique is just one other sort of little angle on something. But whether you do the full thing and go flash and connect with your positive engaging focus, which by the way could be your peaceful place, or you connect, you know, in some other way with, by maybe not doing the full flash, but just adding tapping. I mean, it's all gonna help you. And it's just such a cool thing. And it's so exciting to see just the healing that we have built into each of us. So I get inspired by it, as you can probably tell.
I see your excitement about it. And I see your excitement for sharing it with us. And thank you for being willing to do so again on Hug It Out with us on these evenings. Very generous of you to come tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I've learned a lot this evening too, so it's been great. So thank you.
What a lovely group we have. And it's been really fun watching the time move with how the light has shifted. You know, it's a little bit darker now. Tasha, I don't even know what time it is for you.
Gosh, it's way past my bedtime.
It's really late.
I'm 2 hours ahead of you.
How many?
2 hours. So
Oh, wow.
it's all good. Babies are sleeping, so I'm happy to be here with you.
Oh, that's so exciting. It's always so wonderful to see you, Tasha.
Well, you too. And I just wanted to share that I really appreciate what you said about how when different memories come up, they're linked somehow. Because sitting here with these memories, another older memory that I haven't thought about for years, that was a really healing and peaceful memory came up, and just really beautiful to remember that again, because I hadn't thought about it in so long.
Oh, wow. How powerful.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing when there is space to open into that things just start coming forward? And that when we can slow down and listen, it's such a gift. It's such a gift to be with everyone, and we're all creating that space for each other on these evenings. So thank you, Tasha.
Thank you.
Really, like I said, what's cool about this is you can continue the processing at home. So if you went from a 6 to a 4, you can continue even once we get off this call. You can just go, because the key is the positive engaging focus. The trauma, just enough to bring it in your head, just a flash, and boom, 99% of your focus is on the positive engaging focus. And the tapping and the flash every 5 or 10 seconds, and pause, check in on the original memory, and then back to the positive engaging focus. So it is kind of an odd thing. We think if we're working on trauma, we need to be focused on trauma. And the thing about this is that it's actually the opposite.
Next week, we have wow, she's pretty neat. Her name is Dawn Grace. She is a death expert. Who can call themselves a death expert? She's the founder of the Death School that will be launching in 20 and 21. She has been around death since a very, very early age and has taken all roads through dying with others, through midwifery, through an oncology nurse. She was a death doula. She's a hypnotherapist. And so next week, she's going to join us on a topic of death as medicine. She's going to lead us through exercises and conversation and invite us to consider questions and possibilities as we walk toward our own death. So that is happening next week. Dawn Grace, and I want to leave you with just a couple of these small sentences. I got this from Roxanne Peterson during a level 1 Hakomi training. I laughed so hard, and Todd is the one who inspired me to pull this up. So it's a 1st grade school teacher. Todd does not teach 1st grade, but 4th. And this particular teacher had 26 students in her class, and she presented each child in her classroom the first half of well-known cliches. And she asked them to come up with the remainder. It looks like Todd knows this one. And so these are 6th graders who came up with these. So here's just 5 we'll do, because I know it's kind of getting late. So strike while the bug is close. It's always darkest before daylight savings time. Never underestimate the power of termites. You can lead a horse to water, but how? Don't bite the hand that looks dirty.
That's my favorite, I think. Yeah, especially in COVID. That's a perfect. And every hand is dirty, even if you can't see it. Okay.
Isn't that the truth? These are so good. You can't teach an old dog new math. Love all. Trust me. We'll leave on that one. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Brad, so much. Thank you all for showing up with all of who you are. You are such an inspiration. I hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
You.
Good night.
Bye.